Welcome to video 4 of the Parenting Plan Handbook. I'm Karen Bonnell, and today we're going to be talking about all the changes that are part of normal everyday life and how those are built into your parenting plan. We're going to talk about conflict resolution, another very important part of how two co-parents manage to raise kids into adulthood in a healthy way. And we'll also talk about additional guidelines that will bring us to a completion of your parenting plan document. With me today is Felicia Soleil.
Thanks, Karen. I think, when we think about conflict resolution, what is the cause behind conflict to begin with after we have uncoupled, created a semblance of our co-parenting relationship? It seems to be it's really about change. I mean, what we know for sure is over the next several years, there are going to be several changes that take place within that couple along with in that family structure. So let's talk about how we handle changes, first of all.
Really good idea. In fact, the most common or potential sources of conflict are just those daily, weekly, monthly residential schedule changes. If things could always map exactly the way we wrote them down in our residential schedule section of our parenting plan, that would be easy. But life is not that tidy. Not for the adults. It's also not that tidy for kids. And so we have to have a mechanism for trading time and swapping time, and oftentimes we put a provision or two in our parenting plan to describe just exactly how that would work. Do we swap weekends? Do we swap light time for light time? In other words, a Tuesday evening is not like swapping for a Saturday. So we look at those kinds of changes through the lens of how do we continue to balance our residential schedule and yet allow for some flexibility for the normal back and forth of our schedules, right?
Right, and I think that flexibility is key because are we talking about something that becomes the new norm, which is every week we're making changes because we can, or is it really about knowing that our commitment is to something that's stable and more consistent and predictable with life's little glitches along the way. And so knowing that these are temporary changes as opposed to long-term changes, which we'll get to in a minute. So what suggestions do you have for just the temporary changes that, just as everyday life?
Right. Well, predictability first, stability first, and then change second, particularly in the front end. Let's make sure we give kids a chance to settle into rhythms, right? But like I said, there are going to be those things that come up, and the more clearly we communicate, the way we request those in email, the more we are thoughtful about how we ask for those trades and swaps, the more successful we're going to be in making those fine-tuned adjustments that are going to come up in our residential scheduling between ourselves and our co-parent. Now, there are some other particularly interesting things that happen in terms of short-term changes. There might be a business trip, right? So if you travel for your job, your business travel may not map neatly with your residential schedule and the time that you're off duty. So you're going to need to work with your co-parent to figure out how to deal with those absences and the times that you're not going to be able to maintain your responsibility for the residential schedule. In a healthy family, we're able to kind of coordinate and work together around that, keeping in mind that I might travel too, and I might not be able to be the backstop for you during your residential time. So we're going to need that third adult, potentially, to help us cover those times when neither of us are available to meet those needs for our kids.
And I go back to, I think, the concept of reciprocity, which is I'll do a little bit of something for you if you'll do something for me, and we act in good faith that we know that we're not going to undermine the other. And that just, I think, overflows into the smoothness of what those children are going to experience when different things have to be decided apart from what had been the consistent schedule.
Exactly. Felicia's talking about reciprocity, and I often use the word generosity. And so I want to offer you time. I want to try and be available within reason. I don't want to build resentments because I'm always, making up for you. But I want to be aware that actually at the end of the day, we're still raising children together. We're just doing it across two homes. Now, there are some other temporary changes that we might be aware of. God forbid you should need an appendectomy, right? And so these things do happen in real family life. And so, of course, in an emergency situation, I'm going to try and cover for you. We're going to be available to each other, those kinds of things. The same thing could happen with a child, where there's a special need for our child, maybe not a medical crisis, but a reason why, maybe Madeline, with her 3 AP classes, is now the lead in the play, and we say, hey, maybe we just need to let Madeline rest into whoever home is closest to the high school for a brief period of time so that her life de-stresses while she's in this very exciting moment. And then as soon as that's complete, we're going to go right back to our residential schedule. So when we're in good relationship, we will make those wise and prudent decisions on behalf of our children.
I think that's a good point about alleviating the stress of the children when the schedule itself sometimes will cause the stress. Even if you are low conflict, just by virtue of the back and forth and the shuffling and where do I have to be now, especially as these kids get older and have more and more commitments and filled schedules, you don't want the residential schedule to be part of that stress. And how can you make it alleviate that stress?
Exactly. The third thing I'd like to just mention is that we do have parents who have work schedules that require flexibility. I think about our physicians who are on call, who might be hospitalists. I think about, well, you live near the airport, and so you're working a lot with pilots whose schedule is very unpredictable. So there are some parents who have to build into their schedule a way that they sit down with 3-month periods of time where a parent's work schedule might in fact really inform the other parent's schedule with the children. And just as you did when you were in one home, you worked with that flexibility, you want to carry that forward so that we allow for those strong and engaged relationships with children. Now, the other thing is, remember we talked about building in expected changes, those developmental tiers where the residential schedule might change. So we know that we've actually built those into the residential schedule, and those are changes that we walk up to with expectation, understanding, and preparedness. I think the things that can be most difficult, though, are those long-term changes, the kind of profound, really significant changes that could maybe bring us all back to the table.
Right.
Maybe you could talk about that.
So I think first and foremost, I would look at changes that occur with my clients with respect to their work schedules. And a lot of times that might be somebody who's doing shift work. For instance, somebody's been working day shift for several months or several years, and all of a sudden they're put on graveyard.
Right.
And now we have complete and utter upheaval with respect to our residential schedule because we need overnight care for the children. We need sleep time for the parent who's the nighttime worker. And then we still need quality time with the parents and the children in that respect. And so how do we adapt to something that's as significant a change as that kind of a work schedule change? Obviously, we have people who get promotions, they get different schedules, expectations. Sometimes people aren't doing business travel, and then all of a sudden they're expected to do business travel.
Correct.
So it's those kinds of significant things when we want to look at whether or not we actually need to, as you said, return to the table, and whether that's a new business meeting between the parents or whether that's actually bringing in another neutral facilitator, such as a mediator again, or consulting with an attorney about how these changes can creatively be handled in a way that still maintains your initial intention of minimizing conflict and co-parenting and collaborating together well.
Right. And I think about when those promotions take a parent into a new city.
Right.
Sometimes there's these amazing and wonderful opportunities, and you'd think, I would never leave my kids, but let's just face it, you get offered a job, to go to Denver for twice your current salary. That may be another really important way that you take care of your family and your children, even if it means relocating. What do you tell parents about that?
Well, in Washington State, where I practice, we have a relocation statute. So again, I would advise the viewer to check with their own jurisdiction and get some legal advice as to how relocations of that nature are handled. But when we talk about it really philosophically with clients, it's what is going to be best for the family if one of these parents has to relocate? And are they relocating with the children? Is that the relocating parent? And there will be the primary parent now, and the other parent is having to now structure the one who's remaining in the original state. what's that time going to look like for them with respect to when they can see the children? Those schedules can become very different. But with technology today, we also have the ability to really enhance what the communication is going to be between the non-residential parent and the child, what the access will be, even though maybe they don't have that physical contact like they would desire,
Right.
Until they do.
Right.
And so if it's the parent who typically is not going to take the children with them, again, we're doing the same thing in reverse. What does that look like for maximizing contact between that parent and child and accessibility? There are a lot of creative things that you can do with respect to school breaks, with respect to long weekends,
Summer schedule.
summer schedules. I mean, there are so many things that I've had clients actually sometimes spend more time with the children by living out of state because we've maximized that kind of a schedule than if they had stayed here and done more of a shared arrangement.
Right.
So again, we also look at time zones. If somebody's moving from Washington to California, obviously it's much simpler because they're still in the same time zone.
Washington to Washington, D.C.?
Right.
Not so much.
Right. We have real problems with that, but challenges, I would say. But there are absolutely ways to handle that without causing everybody to go into a tailspin and a panic, as long as you remember to engage experienced professionals who can help guide you through all the creative solutions around what a relocation creates.
Exactly. And last but not least, we have exactly the opposite, which is maybe I've been a traveling parent. When we created our residential schedule, I was gone Monday through Friday, 3 days a week, 3 weeks out of the month, and now I'm not.
Right.
And what an opportunity to really re-look at that shared schedule, an opportunity for me to have more engagement with the kids and to provide you more backup and relief. Looking again through that lens of what's best for kids, shared and engaged parenting, cooperation, and working together for the best possible outcome of our kids. A chance to come back to the table and make a difference.
Right. And so in those situations, what you want to make sure that you're doing is going back perhaps and crafting a new agreement, crafting a new parenting plan sometimes.
The residential schedule anyway.
Right. And so a lot of times you'll want to have that in some form of written agreement. And again, I go back to, we want to try to put those parenting plans and residential schedules aside in written form and use that as a default if we have difficulties in interpreting what we're doing, on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Because for the most part, if we've built trust and flexibility back, we're going to be able to ebb and flow with whatever changes are occurring within our family structure. But you do want to be cautious and have these new arrangements in writing because that facilitates trust building again, and it facilitates that lack of confusion that you might have through misunderstandings if we don't have something in writing. And I think finally I would add, again, check with a legal consultant in your jurisdiction because sometimes these things should be memorialized in something a little bit tighter for that jurisdiction than maybe something that you might be able to do, perhaps just a handwritten agreement in another jurisdiction.
More informally.
Right.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. That's great. Great tips about checking in with professionals.